We did pre-install this, I promise. Yeah. Okay, so I have to start with a couple of apologies. This is a presentation about policy frameworks. I think that's the apology in itself. There's not an algorithm nor a piece of data in sight, so I hope you weren't expecting lots of numbers. The second apology is that I'm not Paul Prinsloo from South Africa, who's the lead author and is a very, very good speaker, and I'm working from his notes, so bear with me. Paul and I have been working on ethical issues in learning analytics for about a year now, since Vancouver, actually, and we've got a paper coming out in the American Behavioral Scientist special issue around ethics. So hopefully this is of interest to some of you. So, hoping I can get this to work. Okay, so higher education institutions have collected and analysed student data for a long time now, with the focus largely on reporting and management needs. Typically, a range of policies exist which broadly set out the purposes for which data will be used and how data will be protected. But learning analytics has seen the uses to which student data is put expanding rapidly, and I think it's fair to say that policies have not really kept pace with this development. So in this short presentation, we're going to cover the range of areas which we believe policies and frameworks should now start to address, and how our own institutional policies map up. So my colleague, Paul Prinsloo, works at UNISA, which is a very large open distance learning institution based in South Africa, with over 300,000 students from across Africa and the rest of the world. And I work at the Open University, which is also an open entry distance learning institution based in the UK with around 250,000 students, also all around the world. And it's not moving. Okay. So who benefits from learning analytics and under what conditions? Learning analytics should not be a one-sided affair. It's crucial that all key stakeholders are involved in a collective and transparent effort to use student data to both increase the effectiveness of learning and to implement appropriate and timely student support. Students are not simply recipients of services or customers paying for their education. They should be active agents in co-determining both the scope and purpose of the data harvested from them and the conditions for that harvest. We all know that universities routinely collect and analyse data for reporting purposes, and in the main these are massive sets of depersonalised data, and the harvesting and use of such data is thought to pose no particular risk to individuals or groups of students. By registering at a university, students provide implicit permission that such data may be used. However, when their personal data triggers customisation of their learning based on predetermined and often unseen criteria, it might be argued that students have a right to know how their data may be used. We've thought about this quite a bit, and we consider that there are few, if any, reasons not to provide students with information regarding the uses to which their data might be put, as well as the underlying models used to manipulate that data. Indeed, we would say that there is a growing need for a system of informed consent. And if students opt out of having their data included to personalise their learning and support, the implications of that choice can be made very clear to them. And given the continuing changes and advances in technology and the developments in learning analytics, that consent would probably need to be refreshed on a fairly regular basis. So not only does an expanded approach to transparent and collaborative learning imply increased trust and the need for protection of data, it also adds an additional level of responsibility for students to ensure that the data they provide to us is both correct and current. So how do we define vulnerability and harm and prevent potential harm, not only to students but to other stakeholders? In considering this, we might think about issues such as implicit or explicit discrimination, where one student receives or does not receive support based on what might externally be considered to be a random personal characteristic. We might also consider the impact and validity of imposing a label, where groups of students are combined together depending on a combination of their characteristics and treated potentially for the duration of their whole studies as somehow different from others. The potential for bias and stereotyping in predictive analysis can be seen in attempts to produce student risk profiles. Student identity is a multi-layered and transient construct, and any categorization of students based on their data should be both transparent and regularly reviewed. Furthermore, institutions should provide opportunities for students to relabel themselves despite any initial assumptions regarding their potential. And of course, we should aim to ensure that analyses are conducted on robust and suitably representative data sets. If a system of transparency and informed consent can be adopted, it might be argued that the potential for allegations of misuse and harm are minimized. But if we make systems and approaches very transparent, we might also argue that there is increased potential for student abuse of the system. So what recourse do institutions have when students provide false or incomplete information, which may provide them with additional support at a cost to the institution, or perhaps to other students? Many student regulations contain statements which allow the institution to terminate registration if information given is untrue or misleading. And there are obviously other less draconian measures which might also be adopted. So it's generally accepted that data on a learning management system provides an incomplete picture of students' learning journeys. As learners' digital networks include sources outside of the LMS, institutions will increasingly need to find ways to optimize and integrate their data with data harvested outside the LMS. The prospect of doing this, of harvesting data from external sources or social networking sites, provides a number of serious ethical challenges. Not only do students need to give explicit consent for the harvesting of data from sources outside the legal domain of their own institution, the institution incurs an increased responsibility to both protect that data and to seek agreement regarding the uses to which it may be put. They should also take care when they're collecting data from disparate sources not to amplify error owing to the different standards, owners, and level of access on different sites. In terms of analyses undertaken, we should aim to avoid bias and stereotyping, acknowledging always the incomplete and dynamic nature of student identity and experiences. Models may inherently reflect and perpetuate biases and prejudices in cultural, geopolitical, economic and societal realities, so care should be taken to ensure that the contexts of analysed data are carefully considered. We also propose that students have the right to be assured that their data will be protected, obviously, against unauthorised access, and that their informed consent is guaranteed when their data is used. And in practice, owing to the nature of regulatory funding and accreditation frameworks, a variety of stakeholders will access student data, and we suggest that students have an overview of the stakeholders who are granted access to their specific data sets. So higher education institutions should ensure the effective governance and stewardship of data. In fact, Peterson has stated that the most important step that any campus can take is to create a comprehensive data governance structure to address all the types of data used in various situations. And there's a need for structural and resource allocation consideration, because the allocation of resources will inevitably relate to the purpose and benefit. An institution should be clear what its key drivers for success are, what constraints exist, and which conditions must be met. For example, an institution may have an overriding policy of recruitment and retention of specific student groups, ethnic minorities, for example, so that any system must decide how resources will be prioritized, and this prioritization should also be transparent to students. Okay, this is almost getting to the end. So as part of this study, we reviewed all policies relating to and referring to student data within UNISA and the OU, a total of 26 policies and statements. These included the expected privacy and data protection policies, as well as those relating to ethical research using student data, and a huge number of others, some quite bizarre. And what did we find? Within UNISA policies, looking at who benefits, there was no specific reference to beneficiaries, the focus being on protection, and largely on protection of UNISA. Within the OU, the Student Charter includes a number of overarching principles which aim to establish a shared responsibility between the university and the student. The Charter sets out the university's intention to anticipate and respond positively to different needs and circumstances by providing support that is appropriate for each individual learner and their subject area of study. The retention of student data and records policy makes clear that some data will be depersonalized and used for management, development and research purposes. It also states that personal data owned by the university may be shared with third parties, but they must adhere to the university's student data retention and security policies. Slightly hard-hearted now, the Alumni Office has an objective to both keep alumni up to date with university activities, but more honestly, to pursue donation prospects. They have a policy setting out how alumni records are maintained, and alumni contact details are held indefinitely. They like to get money out of us for as long as they can. So, conditions for consent, de-identification of data and opting out. Within UNISA, the interception and surveillance policy makes it clear that UNISA may monitor or put into place surveillance, although the policy applies specifically to the monitoring and surveillance of employees rather than students, slightly frightening. The data privacy policy refers indirectly to students as consumers and makes mention of the collection, analysis and use of student data as within the legal parameters of the business purposes of UNISA. None of the existing policies mandate UNISA to explicitly inform students that their behaviour will be monitored, nor provide students with an opportunity to opt out. Students may only opt out as objects of research, and the policy on research ethics makes informed consent and anonymity non-negotiable. Their students' Charter on Rights and Responsibilities makes no mention of data privacy, access to own personal data, nor to ensuring the correctness and currency of personal data, whether that's from the perspective of the institution or as a specific responsibility of the student. Within the Open University, the data protection policy tells students that some information, including the information you give us about your ethnic background or a disability, may be used by the university to identify students who require additional support or specific services, and we consider disclosure of this information to you as explicit consent to use your information for this purpose. Within UNISA, there is no mention of how student data may be used to tailor support. The UNISA Student Disciplinary Code includes a description of misconduct concerning the provision of materially false information to anyone in or outside of university, but this is about the university, not about students. No attempt is made to define misconduct as providing false or incorrect personal data to the institution. The Open University's Information Advice and Guidance Policy highlights the university's objectives to empower students by providing timely and targeted information, advice and guidance to students at key points along the student journey that recognises and is responsive to diverse and distinct need. The policy also states an aim to provide a service which respects the needs of the individual and is in their best interests. What the policy does not do is discuss the detail behind this, nor who makes the decision regarding what best interests is. Okay, both the university and UNISA have extensive policies looking at general data and how general data is held. The collection, analyses, access and storage of student data, however, is not explicitly mentioned at UNISA at all, but rather implied. The Open University, like most other institutions, has a clear data protection policy which highlights that student records will be created and maintained over significant periods of time. It covers the transfer of data on a need-to-know basis, although that's not defined. Students are told and reassured that their information is protected from unauthorized access and that we're confident that no one will be able to access your personal information unlawfully. They are made aware that they have access to their personal stored data, as well as an overview of stakeholders granted access to it. Neither UNISA nor the OU makes any mention of models or methodologies used to manipulate the student data, nor how a student might seek to gain a better understanding of this. So having reviewed the policies of both UNISA and the OU, it seems clear that the current policy frameworks focus largely on academic analytics and research, with an emphasis on data governance, data security, and privacy issues. Both institutions have ample policies and guidelines to protect data and ensure that data is governed according to national and international legislation. Concerning the question of who benefits and under what conditions, both sets of policy frameworks present the institution as the main role player in determining the scope, sources, categories, and analyses of data. As such, the approach to learning analytics at both institutions is not really very student-centric. Students are regarded primarily as objects of analyses rather than as partners. Currently, the responsibility of students rests mainly with ensuring the correctness and currency of their own data. There is a need to approach personal data in different ways when it is used to categorize learners as at risk or in need of special support, or when placed on different learning trajectories. Historically, both institutions have employed relatively simple models or data sets to customize learning and support, and the scope of both harvesting and analyses of data is a non-transparent affair. Finally, the OU has recently published a high-level review of learning analytics within the university. Although this has focused on gaps in data, a lack of coherence in the approach taken, and a lack of expert resource. The review includes a series of recommendations, none of which consider the student as co-contributor in the process. UNISA has yet to carry out a similar review.
We have time for one question. Thank you.
Hi. With education, I think I agree with a lot of the things that you kind of put forward, and I like the analysis. But institutions of higher ed often deal with the issue of training as well. That is, we need a certain number of professionals to come out to serve our community, doctors, engineers, lawyers, etc. And I actually wonder if it's appropriate for, like right now, we have 50 seats in our medical college every year, and we have 900 people who want to come in. So we just take the top 50 in their averages. I wonder if it's appropriate to allow them to opt out of technologies that might help them become even better, or reduce the load on instructors so that we could offer more seats later. So you've suggested that lots of the control should be in the students' hands. But institutions often have a duty to society as well, and we need to scale. Could you just comment maybe on this?
I think that's really interesting, and that's probably not something that we'd actually really considered. In our own case, we're taking students without any educational qualifications necessarily when they come in, so we're not taking the top entrance, if you like, onto modules. I think primarily what we're saying is that we should be more transparent about what we're doing with student information. And if somebody, knowing a bit more about what we may do, or which groups may be receiving support that they may not be receiving, want to query that, then they should have the right to be able to know what's going on. Thank you.
So we move from policies to data integration.